Councillor Hill.
Thank you very much, Sam, and thank you to the OC Transport team and to the city manager's office. I know that this is a collaborative effort to look at the regulatory component to ensure that we're safe. There are a couple of points that you made that I'm gonna dwell on a little bit. I'm gonna start though by, I think addressing that everybody around this table wants to ensure that we have the safest train system that we could possibly have. And we need to get there through having good oversight, through good operations, good maintenance, good procurements, good regular collaboration and engagement on this. And just to give you full transparency, and this will probably become more apparent in a moment, I'm not convinced right now that our framework is the best that it could be. And that's not necessarily a condemnation, but it's just a comment that as we evolve and mature, since 2011, since 2015, since the legislative agreements were made that set this framework up, that perhaps we have some room to mature even further, because we do have a track record of some safety issues. We have had a procurement system for this LRT that arguably wasn't as successful as it could have been. We've had 2 derailments, 2021, for a variety of reasons, which caused an inquiry. And certainly from my perspective of oversight, it's in no way, shape, or form a desire of mine to be a part of this board when we look at potentially having to do another inquiry. So I do take this extremely seriously. I understand the importance of independence, and you referred to independence, but I just want to clarify how you see your role as independent in that you report to the city manager. The city manager is designing the operations that essentially you're gonna move out on, and city council gave you marching orders in 2018 to say these are the things that we want you to do compliance on. So it doesn't seem as independent as it could be if you're getting direction from management and council from the city on the safety programming that you're going to look at regulatory compliance for, as opposed to looking at technical specifications, industry best standards, federal policies, and applying the standards from those external institutions so that we don't run into a groupthink situation and we're simply self-adjudicating ourselves.
Appreciate the question. Mr. Chair, I need to provide a little bit of context first. And the first point I'll make is that the RMCO's role is not to assess the regulatory regime of the city. Having said that, I will provide you with my appreciation, context based on my 40 years plus in the industry. And I alluded to it earlier that in order for things to go right in terms of a safe and reliable operation, bearing in mind, again, that the city, I think, has made some very good decisions to mitigate those risks that you find in TSB watch list and the other commuter lines face. So CBTC is one. Another good decision is there's no grade crossings. That's one that you see very high up there in terms of the TSB watch list. But having said that, the things that need to go right for an operation to be firing on all pistons, so to speak, and to run safely and reliably requires that the design be right, requires that the regulatory compliance in terms of those inspections be done correctly, requires ongoing focus on quality assurance and training. The analogy would be like if you take your vehicle to the garage every 12,000 kilometers to do your oil change and to do your specified inspections, that would be the analogy to the regulatory inspections. But that's not enough, because if you have a bearing issue from the design of the vehicle manufacturer, that's got to be addressed. So that's a separate issue. So we need to distinguish how design issues need to be addressed. And if you alluded to the federal regulations model, I've worked in that for 40 years. I can tell you that the way these design issues are addressed, and I've seen many in my career, is first that the TSB would investigate. So the TSB is the federal body that performs comprehensive independent investigations. The city does have an agreement with the Transportation Safety Board. They have investigated this bearing issue. The second thing that would happen is that the regulator, Transport Canada, in the analogy of the federal model, would request from the operator, so the city, as well as the designer, in this case, it's Alstom and RTG through subcontracts, to fix the problem, to address the bearing issue conclusively. And in the meantime, until that bearing issue is addressed conclusively, to undertake interim mitigations to ensure that the risk is brought down to an acceptable level. That's also been done in the city, in that the OC Transpo has been engaging, to my best knowledge, with, and we're going to get an update on this the next meeting, with RTG, RTM, as well as Alstom, in finding a permanent solution to the bearing. It's very complex, very technical. You may argue about how long it's taking, but it is a very complex issue. But nevertheless, there are interim mitigations being taken in that the frequency of inspections of those bogies and those bearings is now much more frequent than the normal schedule indicated in the program. So we need to distinguish the bearing issue as a design issue, but I'll give you also my perspective on the regulatory framework relative to the layers of oversight. We've talked about the fact that there are many layers of oversight. It's not only about OC Transpo, it's about the RMCO performing independent. And when we talk about independent, the line of reporting is to council, with a sideways line to the city manager in terms of the quarterly reports. But the direct line of reporting is to council. And this is why I'm here presenting the annual compliance report to Transit Commission. We talked about the fact that the work done by the RMCO is based on objective evidence. It's about documents and records. It's about interviews. It's about field observations that we can achieve a fact and evidence-based determination. So in a nutshell, I think we could say that I appreciate the concern about the bearings, and it needs to be resolved. And we're going to get an update. This Transit Commission is going to get an update in the May meeting from what I saw earlier. But those other elements, the regulatory compliance, those inspections need to take place. And we're seeing progress there, and we're closing the gap. But the other elements, such as quality assurance, also need to be driven very actively by all the stakeholders. If we look at the bearing, for instance, the initial derailment was because the bearing itself failed. If you read the TSB report, they talk about a bearing design that was taken from a previous vehicle that wasn't subject to the same load environment, that is now subject to a higher load environment. That's got to be addressed. But the second derailment related to that was actually more of a quality assurance issue, where there were some loose bolts that were left. It's almost as if you go bring your vehicle to the garage, again, the analogy, and you change your tires, and then you have a mishap later because the bolts weren't tightened properly. So, the point I'm trying to make is you got to look at the full spectrum of issues, from design to inspections to workmanship. All of them have to go right. But I can tell you from my experience in terms of the regulatory regime model, the many layers of oversight that are present in the Confederation line are very substantial, and they do provide perspective, because it's not only about OC Transpo and the RMCO, but also external experts that perform audits of the SMS and SEMS that are also sent to Transport Canada for review.
No, thank you for that, Sam. You referred to some good decisions that the city made vis-a-vis the safety options. You cited, having no grade crossings and the collaboration and the CBTC process. I'm not going to dispute that. But I would say when it comes to a serious safety related issue, or I would call it regulatory framework issue, is it appropriate for the entity, the corporation that's going to be operating and maintaining that system to be the one deciding, making that good decision? As a councillor in a ward where we have multiple at-grade crossings, I agree with that. I'm also well aware we've had accidents at several of those at-grade crossings. So I don't dispute the logic and the good decision behind management and executive leadership to say we shouldn't, for example, have at-grade crossings. My challenge is, why is that not simply regulation that we are being compliant with so that we don't have to potentially make a bad decision, as perhaps we've seen in the past when we look at our light rail journey?
I think to answer that question, we would need to ask, does the regulatory regime have the necessary mechanisms to bring resolution to design issues? Because I think from just a pure oversight point of view, we agree that making sure that your inspections are done is not going to fix your design issue. That's like the vehicle again. You bring in your vehicle, you do your 12Ks. It's not going to fix the design issue. So are the mechanisms in place, and are the actions that were taken in the Confederation line consistent with what would be done in a federally regulated model to address the issue? And as I said, if this kind of issue would happen in a federally regulated model, we would need to get impartial, objective, comprehensive investigation to know what happened. So that was done by the Transportation Safety Board. It's a federal agency, and I know them very well. They're very, very capable people. They have laboratories, they're, material testing. They reviewed this and they did provide some letters about their findings. And then the regulator, and the city is the regulator relative to the Confederation line, and the highest ranking officer of the city is the city manager. So the city manager would need to ensure that all the parties are engaged to find a resolution to this bearing issue. So what has happened at the Confederation line is, with the engagement of the city manager to ensure that OC Transpo is working closely with the contractors and the designer in the same way that Transport Canada would work with the operator as well as the manufacturer, the designer of the bearing, to ensure that there's a process in place to do two things. One of them is finding a definitive solution to the bearing design issue. And the second one is what we do in the meantime to ensure that there are interim mitigations that bring down the risk to an acceptable level. So that was done again in the Confederation line. So we see that if we question the efficacy, the effectiveness of the regulatory regime and want to compare it to how things would be done in a federally regulated model, we see that it would be done basically the same way. Again, I do understand the concern because bearings are a very important element, and we need to bring that to a resolution as quickly as we can, because all those components, design being one of them, regulatory compliance being another, quality assurance being another, it's like a chain with many links, and all of those links need to do their job. So you can have a link that's really solid, but if you have an issue with the bearing from a design perspective, and everything I've read indicates that that's what the issue is, that needs to be addressed.
Thank you, Sam. You've spoken a couple times now about the differentiation between design and the regulatory compliance component. I think there's perhaps a case study here that could be looked at with regard to the rail retaining rails. In 2020 and in 2022, your office did look at tracks. At that time, I'm assuming the acceptable technical specification for the distance from the retaining rail from the actual rail face was 3 millimeters. We've now identified through an assessment that could potentially have been one of the factors that's caused stress to these wheel assembly hubs. So that is a design issue, which either we did not build it to the proper technical specifications at the time at 3 millimeters and it should have been 5, or we caught something that was causing a problem, and now it is within specifications. But certainly that is a design issue that has gone through 2 iterations of a regulatory compliance assessment and was not picked up.
Right, thank you. So, Mr. Chair, as I mentioned, the RMCO's scope of work is to confirm that the inspections that are required in the program documents are performed. So the inspections that were monitored in 2020 for the track and for the LRVs and the catenary, as a matter of fact, showed that there was some partial compliance in some areas, mostly compliance, and as it was a mixed picture. 2022, there was a little bit of an improvement, but I'll make the point again, you can perform your inspections in accordance with your program requirements, but if there's an inherent design issue, that's got to be addressed separately. So when we get to the bearing, I know that there is a discussion right now about the impact of those lateral forces. I cannot speak to the validity of that or the relative importance of that. One thing we know for sure is that we need a stronger bearing in order to ensure that it handles the curves and the distance between guardrails and rail in the Confederation line. And this is in progress right now. The other concern, of course, is what do we do in the meantime? And that's where those interim mitigations are so important, where the inspections for those components has been shortened, increased substantially to ensure that we have visibility so that when something starts to go wrong, that an action is taken immediately to prevent a mishap from happening.
Do you have that flexibility? So I know you'd mentioned that in 2018, your work plan was identified. It was given to you by council. You're moving through that kind of on a key piece by piece basis to do the quality assurance on those specific topics. But if you were, for example, to say, I am concerned about the bearing, I'm concerned about the new design and how that applies to safety specifications, could you then say in 2024, we're actually going to shift focus onto looking at the new pinned collar wheel assembly hubs that are going to be coming out shortly? Is that something that you have the flexibility to do, that you would come back to us, or that you can adjust, or are you locked in on your programming?
Also, short answer is that the RMCO does not get into the investigation or technical solution to a design issue. There's experts that are hired for that. The city's working very closely with RTG as well as Alstom, was the designer, to find a solution. The flexibility that the RMCO has comes through the risk-based analysis, so that the risk-based analysis that is performed at the beginning of every year and then revisited in the middle of the year is to determine which are the areas which are most at issue, which are critical for the city to understand risk and compliance. And that's how those areas are determined in terms of, the areas to be monitored. Having said that, once again, if we were to look at LRVs today and we were to identify which of the inspections in the regime of inspections of LRV, so there's 10K inspections, 25K inspections, 30K inspections, 50K inspections, you may find that the bogies are inspected in a couple of those specific inspection requirements. However, it comes back to the analogy that even if you bring your vehicle in every 12K, but it fails in between because there's something wrong with the bearing, because that 12K inspection is designed to capture normal wear and tear. It's not designed to capture internal design issues. And that's where the question, I think, that is most relevant is, does the city's regulatory regime have the mechanisms in place to address those issues and bring them to a resolution effectively while protecting risk in the interim? And from what I see, the layers of oversight are there. Design issues being addressed in a very, very similar way to how it would be addressed in a federally regulated regime. TSB investigating, and then the regulator requesting that the issue engagement of the operator as well as the design.
Thank you. And I'm not sure if this is for you or perhaps for the city manager, but I'm interested to understand how is the function that you're providing being mutually supported on the Trillium line? Because I understand that that's outside of scope for your office.
That is correct. The delegation agreement applies specifically to the Confederation line. Why does it apply specifically to the Confederation line? Because the Confederation line is very different from the Trillium line. You have an electric train system versus a diesel electric. You have light rail versus what could be categorized as heavy rail. You have a CBTC system in the Confederation line. You've got another type of system, not quite as robust, but there is a system in there. So it boiled down to the expertise of Transport Canada and the very, very specific technical requirements of the Confederation line, which Transport Canada, quite frankly, said themselves they were not equipped to be able to regulate and monitor and audit. And this is where the delegation agreement came in. But bear again in mind, delegation agreement did come with some strings attached. And the strings attached that it's just not self-regulation, because it's not only OC Transpo doing monitoring. You've got an RMCO, which reports the council and provides its transit commissioner report. You've got independent experts that are hired periodically, including the triannual audit of the safety management system and the security management system, which is, by the way, not only performed by an independent expert, but also provided to Transport Canada for review.
Thank you. My last question, a fairly specific one to your report. I just want to confirm, when I read your report on page 25, you referred to WMS 004. I don't know what that means, but you indicated that that was non-conformant. And that's the only piece in the report that I saw that actually spoke to something that was non-conformant. Can you confirm what that refers to and what that means?
Yeah, certainly. So when I talked about the fact that there is a lot of specificity relative to the inspections required for both tunnels and CBTC, I also mentioned that the direction was conformant. What that means is that there are procedures. So the WMS is a procedure, and it is a procedure. There is 19 procedures for tunnels and 23, if I remember correctly, the numbers. And each of them specifies how to prepare to perform inspections, how to perform them, as well as how frequently to perform them, and then to record them. So those inspections do reflect the requirements of both the project agreement as well as the original equipment manufacturer recommendations. So what the monitoring process consists of is confirming that the frequency of inspections stipulated in that WMS procedure is actually executed through objective evidence visible through the records. So what I looked for was, if it says it's a weekly inspection and I monitored an 18-month period, there had to be 52 plus 26 of those inspections that would be done weekly, and records for all of those to confirm that it was done. So if it was not conformant, it means that it was below a 50% mark in terms of the execution of those inspections. So generally speaking, you know, there's the not conformant, there's the partially conformant, there's the mostly conformant. The threshold to go from not conformant to partially is a 50%, and then to go from the partially to the mostly is 80%. And then from 80, of course, to fully conformant, you need to be right up there at 100%.
Okay, but I guess just to be clear in my mind, are you familiar with that specific item that you identified as non-conformant, and if that's problematic? Because I don't understand what WMS 004 means, and it identifies that it was non-conformant. That's the only item in your report that I saw that indicated anything was non-conformant, and so I just wanted to understand what that specifically was, so that if there's a need to refer that to management, we can do that.
Yeah, certainly. So I'm looking at the report right here, page 25.
Page 25, second line,
Right.
number 3.
So the WMS 004 relates to the fire detection and suppression system, and it is an inspection that is required every 3 months.
So the implication there is that it hadn't happened every 3 months consistently.
Exactly, that it was below the 50% threshold to achieve that partially compliance. So not conformant means that it's below 50%.
Okay, thank you very much. That's all my questions, Mr. Chair.